My name is William Gumede, and I'm the founder of the Democracy Works Foundation. And we focus on building democratic institutions, building democracy in South Africa and on the African continent. Now, given the epidemic of violence against women, there has to be a dramatic change in how we raise boys and the focus will have to be in the present and in the future on how do we make boys comfortable in their own skins, with their own feelings, and with their own vulnerabilities. And without the need to affirm their manhood through violence, aggression, and dominance. That is going to be very important if we want to reverse the epidemic of violence against women in South Africa. Boys become the type of boys based on the culture, the beliefs, and the social norms in which they are raised. Now, South Africa's dominant cultures, whether it is white culture or black culture, and the dominant beliefs and the dominant social norms are based on patriarchy, aggressive masculinity, and viewing women often as men's possessions. Boys are expected to be dominant in relationships, to be the financial provider, and have a limited role in caring for children. Men in most South African cultures are often discouraged to show affection. They are often not expected to ask for help, as that would show weakness. Now, in our dominant societal norms about masculinity, boys are not expected to express emotions, to show weakness, or to show vulnerability, or to fail, because that is seen in most of South African cultures as shameful, and because there's expectation in South African cultures that boys and men must be in control at all times. Forging inclusive masculinity in many South African homes is not so straightforward, as many fathers often themselves struggle to secure their own sense of self-worth. Furthermore, in post-apartheid South Africa, with the increasing corruption of cultures, the corruption of beliefs, the corruption of religion, the corruption of politics, have resulted in many adults struggling to make meaning of their lives within the context of their cultures being corrupt, the belief systems being corrupt, and politics being corrupt. Now, in that context, self-worth is often defined by material success, ostentatious display of wealth, and by bling. To start to change our toxic masculinity, we have to begin to look at a principle where men must not be afraid to admit when they are afraid. Acknowledging making mistakes is normal, and to begin to see that failures are learnings and opportunities for growth and for development. We raise boys, we have to emphasize that empathy, listening, and acknowledging the feelings of boys without making judgments should be crucial in parenting. And it should also become culturally and socially and politically acceptable for men to have childcare responsibilities. Boys need a growth mindset. The idea that one can grow throughout life by consistent effort. Nurturing the emotional intelligence of boys are crucial. It translates into managing one's feelings in such a way that one understands that one has to acknowledge what one's feelings say, and that one's feelings have a role, and that one has to learn how to voice feelings appropriately, and that one has to learn that one has to deal with one's feelings constructively and not become a prisoner of one's feelings. Boys need to be comfortable to ask for help. Toxic beliefs, customs, and social norms about how boys should behave should be abolished in all of South Africa's cultures. Boys need to be taught from young about gender equality, about eschewing violence, and having empathy for others. Gender stereotyping leads to sexism and eventually to violence. And it needs to be shunned in all our cultures. Boys need to be taught to respect physical boundaries, personal space, and privacy. The notion that sexual consent should be taught in families, in social spaces, and in schools. Taking personal responsibility for actions, and that actions have consequences, should be emphasized in raising boys. Parents should model non-sexist, non-discriminatory, and non-violent behaviors. Now, the problem is the majority of South African families are dysfunctional. So it's not very likely that they would nurture different types of boys. That means the schools, sports associations, religious bodies, political and cultural organizations, and workplaces has an enormous role to play to inculcate new boyhood values, habits, and cultures, because our families are so dysfunctional, many of our families, that is not possible in a family context. It also means that cultural institutions that inculcate norms must also review their values, their habits, and their beliefs. Schools must early on introduce exclusive forms of masculinity, which must include challenging harmful culture and beliefs about gender, about the toxic masculinity, and the use of violence to force one's way. Challenging stereotyping, combating all forms of discrimination, and acceptance of differences should form the core of the education of boys. There has to be a mass educational campaign to take on sexual harassment, which includes whistling, catcalls, and body-focused remarks, which are demeaning, because that is the beginning of violence. Teaching what mutual consent is absolutely important in sexual relations. And the idea that no means no should form part of education of boys in families, in educational campaigns, in cultural settings, and in schools. Traditional coming-of-age schools within the cultural settings, religious schools, and political party member training programs will have to change their curricula to teach different forms of boyhood to the current toxic masculinity forms of boyhood. All sports training, soccer, rugby, cricket, and so on, should include more inclusive masculinity also. And higher education institutions should have, in all courses, compulsory modules as part of courses to teach different and more inclusive types of boyhood. And prominent business, political leaders, cultural leaders, and icons, celebrities, no matter their popularity, their power and their financial muscle, should be brought to book if found guilty of violence against women. As South Africans will have to unlearn our social behaviors, our cultural behaviors, and our political behaviors towards women. And that will mean it's going to be a much more wide-ranging cultural change and political change and moral change and value change in the country, where gender equality will have to be part of the new norms in in families, in the way we raise boys, in our politics, in our behavior in public, in the business space, and so on, and where we have to unlearn, and the way to unlearn toxic behavior towards women is to shun those and to cancel those who behave toxically against women in order to change the way of behavior going forward.